It's just a huge, huge honor for me today to be podcast interviewing Evan M. Sampson, an attorney with Post and Schell who focuses exclusively on healthcare law. He advises dentists, physicians, and healthcare organizations on compliance, regulatory investigations, licensing issue, contracts, fraud and abuse, and the legal side of practice ownership. He works with practices navigating everything from employment disputes to government audits. He brings a practical, real world understanding of how dentists can protect themselves and run a safer, smarter business. Evan, thank you so much for joining me today on Dentistry Uncensored.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I know you always have to do your legal stuff that says that this is not legal advice. So what is it you always have to say?
Yes. This conversation does not constitute legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. So if any of your listeners have specific questions, they're free to contact me, but they can't rely on this conversation for legal advice.
All righty. Spoken like a true attorney, right? um, hey, so what are the most common legal mistakes you see dentists make that could have been avoided with early advice?
So it's a great question. The first two questions that typically get asked if anything goes wrong are, was there a written policy on this? And was the employee trained on this? So a dental office can go a long way by making sure there are written policies and procedures, things like an employee handbook, and regular training for employees on the issues that pose risk to the practice. So that's things like HIPAA, OSHA, sexual harassment, just having training upon onboarding and annual trainings after that can really go a long way at protecting the practice from a lot of the risk areas that I see.
And how does a dentist get an HR manual? I mean, obviously they don't have the wheelhouse to write the manual because they're trained in math, physics, chemistry, biology. Is there one that you recommend? Do they sell them on Amazon? How do you recommend they get an HR manual?
That's an absolutely great question. So there are tons of resources out there. So there are vendors who specialize in preparing employee handbooks for dental practices and other healthcare practices. There are also resources through trade organizations like the American Dental Association or state dental societies. So those would probably be the first places I would recommend a dentist go to ask for something. Usually, what I say is like something is better than nothing, right? So maybe your first attempt doesn't have to be perfect. So having something is better than having nothing. But I would go to those resources and see what makes sense for your practice.
And how should a dentist think about risk management in 2025 in terms of HR, compliance, billing?
So I think that there are two big risk areas for dental practices that are quite different from each other when it comes to a risk management profile. So the first risk that I tend to identify is areas of fraud, waste, and abuse, and that includes billing and marketing initiatives. So while a dentist may not be subject to a billing audit more than once or twice in their career, the exposure can be significant, and often there isn't insurance coverage to protect against it, kind of like malpractice insurance that typically doesn't cover those situations. So the other area of risk that tends to need a lot of focus is employment law compliance. Employee issues and disputes are likely the most frequent interaction between a dentist and a legal system. So it's really these two categories that I think need to be prioritized for any dental practice to head off any issues.
I'm going to tell you something, and you're not even going to believe it, and it's a true story. I mean, when I'm saying it, I'm already thinking my homie's not going to believe this. I had a friend, a good friend, who's about I don't know, probably 20 years older than me. Anyway, his receptionist was trying to increase production and doing all this crazy Medicare billing is with the government. I mean, it's one thing to do something wrong with a private insurance company, but this is Medicare. The big government. And they finally caught it. They caught on, and he got a lawyer and this and that. And the his only solution was to leave the United States. So he he left everything and went down to Mexico and practiced dentistry there the last 10 years of his life. He just said he said if he stayed in the United States at the minimum he'd be in jail. And he didn't know anything about it and was this crazy receptionist and just can you believe that?
Unfortunately, I can believe it because I had a client literally do the exact same thing. He went back to Taiwan because of a billing audit that made its way into the hands of a criminal prosecutor. I don't want to scare your audience because this stuff can be rare, but it's important to recognize these situations and prepare for them.
And the other thing is, the a private insurance company, they might be able to sue you in civil court or demand a. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but
Yeah.
so you get in trouble. But man, when you're messing with the IRS or the Medicare or the government, I mean, my dad always joked that everything's tax deductible until you go to IRS court. Then there's no jury, and you're gonna lose, and you're gonna go to jail. So just do not mess with the government. They're very heavy-handed.
Absolutely. I would totally agree with that. I think Medicaid for dentists poses a particular risk area, but even if you're not dealing with Medicaid, commercial insurers can still audit you. They can still find massive billing errors and they can come after you for significant dollar amounts. So that's why I always say like fraud, waste, and abuse has to be a priority for every dental office, making sure you're doing coding appropriately, making sure you're documenting appropriately, because it even if it happens once or twice in your career, the dollar exposure is significant, and you're often paying for an attorney as well. So that's why it has to be a priority for any dental office. And this includes young attorneys coming out as well, right? Um, I often hear the phrase, well, they didn't teach us that in dental school whenever I talk about any coding or documentation issues. So it's definitely a good lesson for any young dentist to learn to make sure that you're doing documenting and coding appropriately because it really can come back to bite you later.
I want to clear the air on some of my posting on Dental Town because I get a lot of pushback for dentists since we started this site in 1999. I can't believe that was 26 years ago. They're saying, why did you post that story? You're making dentistry look bad, or I just post the dental news, and it's like, look, man, this is coming across my Google. I have my Google News set up with 10 dental key search words. So this is on the news. This is on Facebook. This all over and you want me to not post on downtown? They just say, well, it's negative, and it's like, and I always think to myself, look, there's a couple 100,000 dentists out there, and just because you know that you would never do something that's stupid, there are dentists out there that I don't know what they're thinking. A case in point, I had another dentist. When I say friend, I mean on Dental Town, but he lived here, and great family, marriage, two kids, just the all American dream. This idiot thought to himself, well, when you bill a crown on a molar, they only pay half. So he's just going to bill the two crowns in that quadrant. He'll just say, instead of doing, the first molar, do the first molar, and they'll pay two halves. And then he'll do a favor to the patient, and they don't have anything out of pocket. So he goes along and does this. Turns out that the ones he was billing to the Arizona Delta Dental inside Arizona, that's like a civil penalty, finance, whatever. But the ones that were being billed across the state line, every single one of them was a federal offense. Anyway, long story short, this guy got sentenced to 5 years. I mean, he
Jeez.
went from having the all-American practice wife, kids. He was living the baller dream trophy wife, and then he went and had to sit in a cage for 5 years. And it turns out there was the insurance companies had an algorithm and how they busted him turned out like something like 93% of all crowns or something like that are billed as a single unit, and his were 90% were being billed as two units. So they bought this brand new algorithm, and it turned out they had just installed it, and he was the first guy it flagged, and he goes and sits in jail. And I'm just sitting there thinking, God, man, I mean, wow, how something so stupid, and then also a lot of times to the kids out there, because we got half our audience is under 30 and they're in dental school or they're just practicing. And it's I remember when Nancy Reagan started this campaign, just say no, because she believed on drugs that kids just didn't know what to say. Someone walked up to you and handed you a joint, and you just and she was teaching them to just say no. And what I learned from that campaign is when people say, well, do you think any way you could just build insurance, this and this? And I said, well, I know, Evan, you don't want me to lose my license and go to jail. I mean, how am I going to explain that to my wife and four kids? And I just laugh. And they're like, oh, no, yeah, I wouldn't want you to do something like that. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, you just asked me to do exactly that. I mean, you just asked me to be a fraud, and I'm not going to lose an 8-year college education in my lifestyle for your stupid dental fraud. But man, you guys, you got a birdie, and when your birdie's telling you, this ain't right, quit arguing with your birdie and just listen to your birdie and don't do it. And my dad always told me, if you're going to do something and you do not want it on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow, then don't do it. And that was in the newspaper, radio, TV day. But today with cell phones and internets and every place you go with cameras there's they say that it's just getting harder and harder to do a crime because there's such a digital paper trail on everything you're doing. I mean, I can't believe it. Sometimes on the news, somebody will have robbed a bank and they're showing cameras of when he drove through this intersection and when he drove through that intersection and went down the interstate. They got like 10 views of this guy with his license plate. I mean, there's no place to hide. But back to employees, the billing stuff. That's just don't be dumb and don't mess with the government and you're going to get caught. It's all digital. But what are most of the disputes with employees?
I would say that they generally fall into two different categories. So usually with an associate dentist, the biggest risk area I tend to see comes from misclassification. So this is onboarding an associate dentist as an independent contractor rather than an employee. So this creates a whole host of problems. But the two areas where people tend to get caught are through an IRS audit, because it's really the IRS, it's the government that decides whether you're an independent contractor or an employee, not the two parties involved negotiating the agreement. What I've also seen is an uptick in this getting caught in workman's comp audits. So workman's comp insurers have certain requirements. They may be doing an audit of your practice. And if they see a lot of people who are identified as independent contractors, they may do their due diligence, find out that they should be classified as employees, and you might get a fine or a referral to a regulator, something like that. So it's a very complicated area, but that's something I see constantly. I'm constantly fielding questions on. When it comes to other staff, the most common issues I tend to see are wage and hour violations. So a dentist who's misclassifying hygienists as exempt from overtime when they should be eligible for overtime, consecutive hours worked without a meal break, mismanagement of accrual for PTO and sick leave. Those are the kind of issues that tend to come up when we're talking about hygienists, dental assistants, even front desk staff. So usually the advice I give is, work with a good payroll company. A lot of the payroll companies have really great resources that they really offer for free for dentists, because a lot of this stuff you don't learn in dental school, right? You don't go to dental school to learn the ins and outs of employment law. There are other resources as well, the American Dental Association and trade organizations. But I would say those are probably the two categories I see when it comes to employment law issues.
Okay, when you said accrual for PTO, that flew right over the 25 and
Okay.
under crowd.
Yeah. So every state is different. Every state has vastly different laws on a lot of this stuff. Some states require that employees receive sick leave and sometimes paid sick leave as well, right? So an employee might be able to take 5 days a year of sick leave. That might apply to everybody. It might apply to full-time employees. It might apply to part-time employees.
And that might
Um,
be a state law where you have to
that
do that.
Yes, that might be a
Oh,
state law.
wow. Okay.
Um, so East Coast and West Coast states are notorious for this. Some states may not require paid time off not for sick leave, but for vacation time. But they have requirements about how an employee is able to earn that sick leave or that paid time off time. So they might have formulas in the state law that require that an employee who works, and I'm just making these numbers up, so don't quote me on this. If an employee works, 40 hours, they earn 1 hour of sick leave. And it's really up to the practice to measure this stuff and make sure that the employee can use that time that they've earned throughout the year. This is really complicated math. I mean, I deal with this stuff all the time, and it can be really hard to track. A lot of payroll systems will do this for you, but it's important that you stay on top of it because this can cause issues later, right? Some states require that earned sick leave or earned paid time off be paid out when an employee quits. If you're not properly, and the technical term is accrual, if you're not properly accounting for this paid time off or sick leave, and the employee asks that it be time off, that it be paid out when they quit, and you can't do that, it might result in a Department of Labor complaint, or an angry letter from an attorney, something like that. So that's why it's always important that anybody who owns a practice needs to keep track of these things.
Yeah, and I want to push back, or not push back, but talk about the first part when you're talking about independent contractor versus employee. Again, my dad always told me that, two people can agree to anything in business as long as they don't agree to something that's illegal. And you can't agree to being illegal. And on that employee deal versus independent contractor, the dentist is doing that because if you're an independent contractor, he doesn't have to withhold taxes and do the FICA matching, and so he's going to save money on doing that. But when you, but that you're getting that from the construction industry, like when I'm building a house and I call you in and you're an electrician. Well, I'm not an electrician. I don't know what you're doing. You're bringing your own tools, your own skills, your own people, and you're doing all the electrical work, and that's an independent contractor. Same with the plumber, same with the roofer. But then they go to you and they say, okay, well, whose dental office is this? Oh, it's mine. Well, who sets the hours? I do. Who hired all the staff? I do. Who bought all the equipment? I do. Okay. And now Frank's working in there. How's he an independent contractor? He came into your building and he's working for you, and you're acting like he's some independent contractor, and you're doing it just to get out of FICA matching taxes and withholding taxes. And I've seen a lot of times where a dentist does this for like 5 years, and then the guy leaves and he goes and starts up his own practice, and his life falls apart, and he doesn't start not paying his taxes, and they go do an audit and they find out that for 5 years he didn't pay any taxes. And then they go to the dentist, and then he has to take out a mortgage on his home to pay 5 years plus penalties and back taxes, and just get sucked, just and sometimes, he forgot all about this associate. They left years ago, and now they're getting a six-figure settlement from the IRS. And so, just again, and then these young dentists, when they go into these, they're young and they want the job, and you're a dentist and you own the building, and so they just agree and they just sign the contract. But they should never sign a contract without having their own lawyer review it. And a lot of these big DSOs, they say all the time that, well, you can go to any attorney, but we have 1,000 offices, and this is our boilerplate contract, and we don't make changes for anybody. Dude, they're lying to you to close the sale. They just paid a dental headhunter $3,000 to $5,000 that they met on LinkedIn to deliver your head to them. You're the dentist. They need you. And what percent of those contracts they sign, even for a lease? I mean, they'll go get a lease. I've seen this right here in Phoenix, Arizona. This guy goes and sets up a 2,000 square foot practice in a 10,000 square foot building. And the other tenants were like, one was a yoga shop, I remember. The other one was like an ice cream. Anyway, long story short, everybody had signed a triple net lease, and then there was a flood, a storm, the roof, the big disaster, and the triple net. They had to fix this 10,000 square foot lease. And when they told everybody what their triple net is, the yoga lady just popped up and said, I'm out of here. The ice cream parlor packed out. Anyway, long story short, he got stuck with the whole bill for a 10,000 square foot roof for even though he's only renting 2,000 square foot. And I said, well, in the real estate lease, I mean, isn't that malpractice from your attorney? I mean, should that have flown with the attorney? And he said, oh, I didn't have an attorney read it. And I'm just like, dude, you're a dentist and you don't sign a 5-year lease to rent. You don't sign an employee contract to go work. You don't sign legal shit without your own lawyer. Agree or disagree?
It's better to invest in having an attorney review it now because you're going to pay for it later. I talk to clients and potential clients all the time. This comes up a lot with leases, like you said, a lot with associate agreements, and they come to me with a complaint. And one of the first questions I ask is, "Well, did you have an attorney review it at the onset?" And often the answer is no. So if you don't pay for it now, you're going to pay for it later. And I think it's best to always get real legal representation at the onset of a relationship and talk to someone. I've represented dentists for over a decade. I've handled more of these kind of situations than I can count. I've been on the DSO side. I've been on the dentist side. Like I know how these things work. I know what kind of leverage the party has, and I know the problems that can come up later. So it's always best to talk to an attorney because once you sign that document, it's going to be really, really, really hard to get out of the obligation set forth in that document.
And the other thing, they stop at attorney. I mean, you're a general dentist. You know, if you can't pull out this impacted wisdom teeth, you send it to a specialist, an oral surgeon. Well, there are specialist attorneys who only do healthcare, dentistry. Same thing with accounting. You pick your accountant because he goes to the same church as you. Well, you might be his only dental client. Maybe he has two dentists. There are CPAs that only do dentists. There's lawyers that only do there's dentistry. There's so many nuances that I don't. Okay, so they're a lawyer. Okay, they're an accountant. Do they know dentistry? Is this their wheelhouse? Because I'm sure dentistry is very different than plumbing and agriculture and manufacturing and cruise boat operations. I mean, the world is so technically complicated that you got to work with your specialist. And I blame this on the dental school deans because they have these big old graduation ceremonies where your family comes, and I still remember my mom and dad out there crying and all that stuff like that. And they tell you you're a doctor, and but they should say, when you walk by and get that diploma, they should say, "Congratulations on becoming a doctor of dental surgery." But remember, you don't know shit about anything else, okay? You don't know accounting, you don't know law, you don't know engineering, just you're a dentist. Stay in your wheelhouse. That's what Warren Buffett always talks about, that the most important thing about intelligence is knowing the boundaries of your circle of competence and knowing when you step out of your boundary. Just like in dentistry, they're so smart and successful in dentistry, and then they think they're going to be a stock picker on the side. It's like, well, you're competing in the Warren Buffett League where that's all they do for decades. So every time you're doing root canals, fillings, and crowns and going to CE courses on dentistry, you're competing with the guy that's only picking stocks. That's why, you get a diversification. You put it in what is it, an S&P 500 fund or something like that, because I know during that 2008 real estate crash, I knew three of the biggest, richest baller dentists out here in Phoenix that I just love. They're smart as hell. They decided to go do a big condominium development up in Flagstaff. And they bought like 20 acres. They're doing this big old deal. And there was a couple things they didn't understand. And all three of them lost everything. And by
Gee,
I mean everything, I mean everything. I mean, even the Homestead Act only insures your home up to like what, like $100,000 or something like that. And they were in $700,000 mansions in Scottsdale, and they had to downgrade. And oh yeah, and the wives were real happy about this. They just really enjoyed this financial calamity. So, what events typically trigger state board investigations, and how can dentists reduce their exposure there?
so usually board investigations are launched by some kind of complaint, right? Usually it comes from a patient, but it could come from somewhere else, right? A competing dentist or someone who fashions themselves as a whistleblower. So the best way to reduce exposure is typically build a culture of compliance in your office. Like I mentioned before, have those written policies and procedures. Make sure you do training because just having those kind of structures in place, one, it's going to prevent a lot of misconduct from happening in the future because everybody is going to be trained on what to do. And two, you're going to be able to show the board that you're trying. Boards are typically very good at discerning between honest mistakes um, and true misconduct, true malfeasance, because they see this stuff all the time. So if they see maybe there was a particular case where there might have been a coding or a lack of documentation, but you have written policies and procedures in place, you have clear disciplinary guidelines to make sure that there's enforcement within the practice. That's going to go a long way in front of a regulator, and it usually does. If they chalk it up to an honest mistake, a bona fide error, substantial compliance, the remedy that they're going to enact is really gonna fit with that. If they see that there's true intent or reckless behavior, they're going to come down much harder on you and your practice.
I believed that this is my belief. I don't know if it's true or not, but I remember, you'll do a denture and you do the whole thing, and the lady just comes back and says, "I'm sorry, but I hate this denture and I'm wearing my old one and I want a refund." And I always thought that, I always read like that the industry average for in-store purchases in the United States, about 8 to 10% of sales by value are returned. For online e-commerce purchases, return rates are 20 to 25%. And these dentists, their ego, it's like they don't even have a 1% return rate. And somebody and Mrs. Jones wants her money back, and your ego doesn't want to do it. And then the next thing you know, she files a deal with the board. So now you got to cancel patients for the whole day, all that production, and you're not sleeping good, and you got an ulcer going, and then you're down there at the board, and then they open up the chart and they find something else related, not even related to the denture, or it just starts a whole investigation. And it's like, why don't you just return it? And then question for you, well, do you agree with that? And then that, not refunding their money is a big issue. And then number two, they're always saying, well, if I'm going to return this, I'm going to have them sign something. And I never did that. I mean, that might not be right, but usually it's a thing. I mean, I don't want some lady living a mile from my office telling everybody that she's not happy in my work and this, that. I remember one time I did something, I forgot what I did. I did it on some woman, and she wanted her money back. And I just said, well, no problem. I went back and I wrote her a refund check, and I went out there, and she walked out. She told her husband come back to her and shook my hand and says, I really like the way you handle this. Thank you so much. She's all upset now. So thank you so much. And just the goodwill. But do you think when you refund, if they cash the check, does that mean they accepted the refund? Or I'm
So
not a
so
lawyer,
you're
I'm a
talking
dentist.
so you're talking to a lawyer. So my instinct is always document everything. So generally my recommendation is refund all the requests. Like give the refund, but
You agree with
always
that?
I agree with that. That's what I always recommend. What I usually tell my clients is the worst thing that you can bring into a dispute is principles, because everything has to be a business decision. And you put it best, right? A board complaint is going to be expensive when it comes to time and money. A lawsuit, even if it's a small claims matter, is going to be expensive when it comes to time and money. So I always recommend give the refund. But what I also recommend is get the release from the patient, because that way it's documented and there's finality. So I don't I don't know if I've ever seen it happen where someone issues a refund and then the patient files the lawsuit anyway. But as an attorney, I always tend to be cautious. I tend to be risk averse, and it doesn't have to be a long release, right? We're not talking about a 70-page document with fine print. But I generally recommend to my clients that they get the release from the patient just to make sure, right? Just to prevent anything else from happening in the future.
And let's say you're 30 years old and you just started your dental office. Where should she get that release at?
That would be something you probably need to talk to an attorney about. That's not something, because it is a legal document. That's probably not something you're going to be able to get from a trade organization or resources online. So I would recommend talking to an attorney in that situation, because I just don't think you're going to be able to get the properly worded release from anywhere else, and who also understands the compliance rules in place, because some boards disfavor certain language in those kind of patient releases. They do recognize the enforceability of some provisions, but not all of them. So it's important to talk to an expert.
And the dentists, they got to realize that, burnout, disease, hating your job, these things can add up. And going to the board is in lawsuits, it's big stomach pain. And I'll give you an example. One of my favorite dentists on earth that I truly loved, was a mentor, all that stuff. They say in dentistry that they call this the Bermuda Triangle, because when you get an infection from upper canine to canine, the veins go back into the brain. And he someone came in, their canine was abscess and or decayed in pain, and did a routine extraction, but he didn't think antibiotics were necessary, or he forgot the antibiotics or whatever. Anyway, long story short, 2 days later, she's in the hospital. She dies of a brain abscess, goes to trial. Yeah, you can't defend not giving antibiotics, pulling an abscess tooth, canine to canine, loses all stuff. But going through that, I never saw him smile again. He never loved dentistry again. He become despondent. It just completely changed his entire deal. Instead of just saying, "Hey, I'm a human, man. We make mistakes. I made a mistake." And then some mistakes, it's like you get a text in your car and you just look down at that text. Well, sometimes that means you crash your car and kill someone. You don't text and drive, but humans make mistakes. And it was just he just all he did is fight about it. And but here's what's weird: like 4 years after that lawsuit, he died from stomach cancer.
Oof.
And you'll never be able to change my mind. I think it was that prescription, that lawsuit. I think somehow, I'm not an oncologist, but I think it caused his stomach cancer, and he died of it, and there was no trace of it in the family. And you just, gosh darn, you refund their money. It's all over. Just it's your ego, or if you make a mistake, I mean, really, do you look in the mirror ever and say, that looks like a guy who could walk on water and never made a mistake? I mean, we all make mistakes. The deal is, if you learn from your mistake, it's a lesson. And some lessons can make you die of stomach cancer, and some lessons, you stack your car, you kill someone. I mean, just man, you just got to just chill and happy go lucky. It's like the Stoics. I always laugh at the Stoics, because they lived through. I mean, when I say the Roman Empire, I mean, what a crazy time. They were burning and churning organisms. They say that 2/3 of all the humans died from biology, malaria, smallpox, all these ills. They said that in Rome, people were coming from everywhere, bringing these diseases from thousands of miles away. They said on Rome, on a good year, 3% of the people would die from some plague-like condition, and on a bad year, it was a third. And this went on for half a millennium, for 500 years. And now they're doing all this DNA stuff on bones and all this kind of stuff like that. And so the Stoics, the people who wrote all those Stoics and meditations and Cicero and all that stuff, is because they lived in horrible times. I mean, I remember Marcus Aurelius and Caesar talking about going on long walks and just all the dead people along the walk, and guards carrying them off. And that's when they developed the cesarean section, because Caesar noticed that the woman was dead, but the pregnant belly was still moving. So he taught his soldiers to lance open the stomach and pull the child out to save it, which they had said had a material impact on their population growth of becoming the first city that had 1 million people. But I mean, just life's brutal. Sometimes I think the hardest thing about life is just getting through it. But man, whenever you can just avoid risk, refund the money, forget the board, don't do anything stupid on insurance billing. Hell, you're filling out a chart, like, like that's not gonna do something. Just be smart and follow your intuitions. What trends are you seeing with insurance audits, especially PPO, clawbacks, and coding disputes?
So there are a few high risk codes that I've seen in my practice. And this comes from Medicaid and also comes from private insurers because they're going to audit very similarly. So the the most frequent code that I see that's targeted by insurance companies is upcoding from a simple extraction to a surgical extraction. That is without a doubt the I still don't know whether it's the case, whether it's the highest abused code in dentistry or whether it's got the biggest target from the insurance companies, one or the other. But I know way more about surgical extractions than I ever thought possible. I'm not a coding expert, but that's the one I see most frequently. There are a few other examples. Unbundling for anesthesia is one I've seen. Lack of documentation for caries risk assessments in pediatric settings, and periodontal scaling and root planing. That's another common one that gets picked up by insurance companies. Upcoding with composite restorations, and D2391 to make sure I have this in my notes that you need to indicate caries extends into the dentin because that's something I've seen flagged a handful of times by insurance companies. So that's just a handful of examples. I've seen cases with how do I say this? Very creative ways to code particular procedures that has been judged to be upcoding or unbundling. So I would just make sure that any dentist that I counsel, make sure you're up on the proper terminology. Make sure you have at least a somewhat recent CDT book because there are new codes that are introduced. They'll tweak stuff now and then. So if you're relying on old information, you may find yourself in trouble.
That documenting that there was cavity into the dentin, is that make you pro dental radiology AI? Like there's companies like Overjet and Pearl and Diagnocat and Belemni. I mean, because they have all this fancy stuff and documentation. Do you think that's a do you like dental radiology AI for legal CYA cover your ass?
That's a really, really good question. I haven't needed it yet. Like I'm look, I think I'm lucky in one sense. Like I'm not a clinician. I can't tell whether something's clinically right or wrong. I have to rely on someone like you. And depending on the case, I might need to go out and get an expert who can really speak to the clinical aspects of whatever case. Um, so I would probably trust an opinion like you to tell me, hey, this AI product I've used is fantastic. It's picking up stuff that might have gotten overlooked. So I don't know if I would be the right person to answer that question, but it's a really interesting one, and it's not really one I've had to face yet. So that it could potentially be a game changer, I would expect, but I would probably defer to my clinical experts over something like that.
Now, people want you as their attorney. I mean, you're in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. Are all your clients in New Jersey, or do you do people in Connecticut? I mean, I don't think you'd do someone in Arizona, would you, or would you, or how?
So
If they're look-
I'm admitted in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. And I've represented clients who have business operations all over the country. So I've represented clients in New England, in Michigan, in California, Texas, Florida. It's going to depend on the specific client, and it's going to depend on what rules the state allows. So I've become familiar with laws all over the country. I've represented dentists in a whole host of different locations. So um, I'm based in the Northeast, but just because you might be in another state doesn't mean that we can't at least have a conversation, or at worst, I can find you someone who can help you.
All right, and so back to employment law. Are there any special nuances with hygienists and dental assistants? I mean, yeah, that's who the dentist is working close with all day long. Back to employment law. Do you see special issues with hygienists or assistants?
I really don't, not with regards to employment law. Probably one question I get asked more than any other is whether a hygienist is exempt from overtime. And I think we talked about that before. There's a very complicated analysis at the federal level. So a hygienist could technically be exempt from overtime due to a few factors: how they're paid, how much they're being paid, whether they have certain educational attainments, right? If they have a bachelor's degree instead of an associate's degree. But by and large, under federal law, hygienists should be paid hourly, and should be entitled to, I guess I shouldn't say they should be paid hourly. They should be eligible for overtime, right? So to make sure you're doing that, the best way to protect yourself is to pay them hourly and track their time. State law differs, right? So even if you can satisfy all of the requirements at the federal level, there may be state law that makes it even harder to exempt the hygienist from overtime. So that would probably be the one area where I see employment laws is sort of unique, because hygienists could potentially fit in one category or another. But I think most of the issues I see with hygienists and dental assistants are similar when it comes to front desk. I guess there might be one exception for dental assistants. I often get asked the question, if I pay for training, especially for my dental assistant, right? If I want her to take an X-ray certification course and get certified in X-ray, and I pay for it, and she leaves soon after, can I deduct that from her paycheck? Um, Again, this is highly dependent on state law, and different states have different rules when it comes to this kind of thing. So this is probably another area where I would say probably talk to an attorney. The answer might be yes. You can structure that to make sure they don't leave after you pay for their training, but that's probably an area where I would say talk to an attorney and see if you can do that in compliance with state law.
Here's a more of a personality thing. I've seen this debate on Dental Town for 25 years. Yeah, a patient is on the phone, and she's calling about telling the receptionist that she's going to sue you and go to the board and blah blah blah. Or you get a letter from OSHA or the board or whatever. Some dentists want to take the call, while other dentists say, no, don't talk to the patient, don't talk to the OSHA, don't talk to the board. Talk to your attorney before you start talking to an upset patient. And some people just like, go to the horse's mouth, and the lady's upset, just talk to her. And other people coach, no, talk to your attorney first. Where do you sit with that conversation?
So I'm going to give you an answer that is an attorney's favorite expression is it depends. That's sort of the answer to every legal question is it depends. I think OSHA, there's a few different scenarios. Usually, and don't quote me on this because there's always exceptions, right? Usually, the patient who threatens a lawsuit, or they say, I'm going to have my attorney reach out to you. Usually it's not those patients that are the concern, and usually it's not those patients where you do hear from a lawyer. It's usually the ones you don't see coming. So if there's an opportunity to diffuse a difficult situation with a patient who's making threats like that, do what we talked about before. Issue the refund. If you're only comfortable doing the refund, if the patient signs a release, talk to an attorney. They can help you with it. But usually those kind of situations can be diffused, and you may not hear from that patient down the road. OSHA and a lot of other regulators are very similar to boards of dentistry. They're very good at discerning between honest mistakes, right? If they see that you have a culture of compliance versus true misconduct, true malfeasance, reckless behavior, they're going to be able to discern the difference. So, depending on the situation, if use your judgment, if you feel comfortable discussing a situation with a regulator, do it. But it's possible you have insurance coverage. You can talk to your insurance carrier. If it's probably best to let them know as soon as possible so they can't disclaim coverage later, but check with them. There might be coverage over, a regulatory violation with that. If you have resources, colleagues, trade associations. Talk with them about it. See what they say. They may have experience with the exact same situation, or talk to an expert, talk to an attorney, because they may likely have experience. Um, was there was there another example we talked about? Oh, if you get a letter from an attorney, right? Um, it may be nothing, right? A lot of attorneys send letters to dental offices because they're representing a patient in another personal injury case, right? Another malpractice case, slip and fall, and they just need health records, right? So don't freak out every time you get a records request from an attorney. If it's something geared towards you, right? If you get a letter from an attorney who's asking for access to personnel records for one of your former employees or current employees, um, or it's a really problematic case when you're reviewing the patient chart, talk to your malpractice carrier, talk to an attorney, right? If you really get the sense that this is a problem, um, you want to be prepared to face that head on. Don't stick your head in the sand, right? You want to face it head on, get the right people around you to help you through the situation. What I always tell my clients is like, I'm your attorney. It's my job to worry about this stuff so you don't have to, right? So talk to someone who has the expertise, who knows what they're doing, and you're going to get the assistance you need.
Yeah, and I don't want to say, and I also want to add something on those records. I mean, the lie is worse than the crime. I mean, in a Christian nation, people hate the sin, but they love the sinner. I still think with Bill Clinton, I mean, nobody liked his wife. And when he got caught with Monica, if he just would have walked out there and said, "Hey, why don't you try being married to Hillary for 25 years?" You know, but he lied, and they caught him in the lie. And I know cases out here where the dentist had an issue, a state board issue, and it was just going to be a slap on the wrist. It was going to be no big deal, but they discovered that the charts sent in that he had altered the chart after they requested for his charts, and that was a technical knockout. I mean, that was the biggest deal. And I know another case right here in Arizona where it was a dental anesthetic. But basically, the hygienist came in and numbed up this little kid, and he didn't know that, and so he came in later and he numbed up again, and the kid, passed. It was just a tragedy. But if that wasn't bad enough, he altered the records, and that's what took it from just a tragedy to a criminal case involving a death of a. I mean, it's just like, my God, don't do it. Just yeah. I mean, they can they. I mean, they bring in forensic people and they can say the ink and this and then computers. Again, whenever you're doing a crime on the computer, you think you erased your cookies or you think it's all good. They'll bring in people who are Python full stack software developers and engineers, and that computer looks totally different than you, and they're going to show the jury that you criminally would try to go back afterwards. And so just don't be dumb, man. Just don't be crazy. And then back to the ego thing where you just gotta half of life. I think as I get older and older, now that I'm a 63-year-old grandpa with 8 grandkids, that you just got to keep lowering your expectations of other people. I mean, people are wild, they're crazy, and these aren't bad times. I mean, gosh darn, would you have rather been living during World War II or World War One or the Civil War? How would you like to live in Rome where 3 to 30% each year could die of some virus that somebody hiked in from Asia, Africa, Europe, 1,000 miles? I mean, just, it's not all bad. And then these dentists, their ego, they're such snowflakes, they get a bad review and they just lose their mind. And I'm like, dude, I'm on your website. You have like 65 reviews. They're all great reviews. And then one Karen loses her flipping mind. And I'm sitting here thinking, most normal people would think, if I thought you had 50 reviews on your website for your deals, I would, if two or three of them didn't say, Evan is just the worst thing in the world, well, I wouldn't even think it's a legit review website, because I mean, what out of 100 people, for every 100 Americans, what percent would you say are batshit crazy?
The technical legal term is a whack job patient, and I probably shouldn't say that, but
But I mean,
That's
what
yeah.
percent are whack jobs? Out of 100 patients,
Oh,
what percent would be a whack job?
I happen to see a lot of them in my practice.
Well,
Um,
it's got to be at least 1%. It's got to be at least
it's
2%.
it's
So you got a crazy lady and or a crazy man, and but anyway, they want to sue. They want to do crazy stuff. Talk them off the ledge when they get a bad review. Should they call their attorney? Should they try to sue? Should they try to do that? Is that a successful strategy, or is it just get the hell over it and go eat a go to what I do? I treat myself to my worst food. Like I know you should not eat at Arby's. I'm not dumb. It's processed, but I'll just go to Arby's and eat a roast beef with sauce and a potato cake.
Yeah, what I tell my clients is it's unfortunate, but you're going to have to move on. You can try and go through the appeals process on something like Google or Yelp, but that's more likely than not, it's not going to be successful. So I tell my clients to move on. The worst thing a dentist can do is respond publicly, right? To make a comment on a bad review on social media, because that's a HIPAA violation, and you might be hearing from OCR, from the Office of Civil Rights, over a HIPAA violation. So I've seen that happen. So that's right. Having a bad review on a social media site is bad, but having a regulatory complaint and having to go through a regulatory investigation is definitely much worse. It's easy for me as the attorney to understand like different risks are different. Right? Having a bad review is one thing, but going through a regulatory complaint is a whole something else. So what I typically say is like try to do the appeal process, but you're going to have to move on. People are smart. They're going to see 99 good reviews out of 100. Just try and move on and focus on getting those next 100 good reviews.
Sorry, I have so many questions, but there's so many technicalities. Like we talked about a refund, and you said that they should sign something. Walk me through dismissing a patient. How formal does that need to be when a dentist decides to dismiss a patient?
It's definitely got to be formal, although it's not too complicated. So, some states have specific rules on it. But what I generally say is there has to be some kind of notice, reasonable notice to the patient. Usually it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 days. So, send a letter to the patient. That letter should be signed by a dentist. It's got to be a clinical decision. So, I've certainly seen cases where office managers are signing the dismissal letter. That's definitely inappropriate. And if a board of dentistry sees it, they might be problematic. Typically, you need to give the patient reasonable notice and an opportunity to find other care. So if you're in a particular rural area where there's not a lot of options, it could be a very difficult situation for a patient to find another dentist. So usually you can point the patient to a list of dentists in the area through either their insurance carrier or through like a state dental society. One very important note is at all costs avoid terminating a patient while they're in the middle of a treatment plan because that could be considered abandonment of care. This is a particularly big risk area for orthodontists because treatment plans go on for such a long period of time. The other area, which again is problematic for orthodontists, is dismissing minor patients for non-payment, right? It's for an adult patient usually isn't a problem. It's expected that the dentist is going to be able to get paid for the services they provide. And if the patient isn't paying, the dentist can decide to terminate the doctor-patient relationship. But for a minor patient, that can be a real problem because it's not really the minor who's responsible for payment, it's their parent. So that can be a very delicate balance. So that's why, an attorney like me will usually recommend getting payment upfront or making sure that a patient doesn't fall behind too far in a payment plan or something like that. So those are probably the important things to remember when dismissing any patient from the practice.
Now I am from Kansas, so I am a hillbilly. I'm a hick, and but what I did is again, I was in this little area, Ahwatukee. Now technically it's Phoenix, Arizona, but it's really not. It's Ahwatukee because Phoenix, Arizona has this South Mountain Park that goes from like 50th Avenue to 50th Street. It's the biggest inner city park in America. It's like 10 times bigger than the park in New York City. What's that Central Park called in
Central Park. Yeah.
yeah, Central Park. It's just huge. I mean, it's huge. When me and my boys would hike it, we would start like 6 in the morning, and then mom would pick us up like at the other end. It'd be like 6 p.m. I mean, it's like a 12-hour hike. And but anyway, Ahwatukee is this little, it's by the mountain park. It's a pizza between the Indian Reservation and I-10. So it's like, I got here, it was like 25,000 people, and I just couldn't fathom turning someone over to small claims or this and that because I'm going to live in this little piece of pizza in this little town with them the rest of our lives until one of us dies. So death do us part. And I just didn't want to. So what I did every year is, we had a good collection policy and we got up front and, we almost had nothing over 90, but I would say at the end of the year, I would say maybe it was a percent. I don't know, but we just had, a list of people didn't pay. So what I would do, because Christmas is a huge holiday in America. I mean, it's like 40% of the mall's yearly sales are between like Black Monday. It's just a romantic time. So what I would do is I'd get Christmas cards and I'd just hand dress each one. I said, hey, we had a great year because, we just had a great year, great practice. I love Awatuki. And with the spirit of Christmas around the corner, I see that you obviously must have had a horrible year. I see that you didn't pay your bill, and I don't know what went wrong. But with the spirit of Christmas, I'm writing off your my Christmas present to you is I'm writing off your bill because it's uncollected anyway. It's over 90, 100, and whatever. And all I ask in return is that you continue to see us and refer a friend or loved one. And I would send those out. And it used to be at least 10 or 15, sometimes 20 a year. We had a big practice. My God, they would come in crying. They would make me an apple pie. They would tell me what went wrong in their life. I mean, it was like the biggest. I mean, I literally have bromances with men that, they felt horrible. And so, you don't know what you don't know. And you just assume they're just dirt bags that don't want to pay their dental bill. I had one guy, his daughter was dying of cancer, a little thing like that we didn't know. And so I just always think of the human relationship, the long run. They want a refund, there's your damn refund. And I always throw out that liner. All I request is that you continue to see us and keep referring your friends and loved ones. And just and who cares about right and wrong? People are crazy. You don't know the whole story. It's just better to be good.
I think that's a good approach. That could potentially be problematic. So again, you're talking to a lawyer. So
Right?
the important thing to remember with all these things is that in special circumstances that might make sense, but non if you're routinely waiving copays, deductibles, any patient responsibility obligations, that could potentially get you in trouble with um, dental insurance carriers, right? The participating plans that you're participating with. If you participate with Medicaid, copays aren't huge when it comes to Medicaid. But so the important thing with all of that stuff is to distinguish between like routine and non-routine waivers, because this stuff is illegal. Some dentists see it as a victimless crime to just collect whatever the insurance gives them and let their patients walk out without having to pay copays. So insurance companies know this. They definitely don't like that. What I would generally recommend to clients is have a procedure in place to evaluate these kind of applications, right? So if there is a true hardship and a patient can't pay for services, just have a process. So if someone's house burns down, which I have seen, right, that's an exceptional case. But if you're not evaluating patients' financial positions when you're making these decisions, which you should be doing on a regular basis, have objective measures. If someone, uh, if someone loses their job and they really don't have disposable income, that would probably satisfy an objective measure for financial situation because you don't want to be making willy-nilly decisions because it's the having the process in place is what regulators are going to look at. It's what insurance companies look at. That's the difference between what I said before, an honest mistake and true reckless behavior. So just keep that in mind. I think all dentists should keep that in mind because when you enter into a participation agreement with an insurance company, you're promising to them that you're going to make a good faith attempt to always collect the patient responsibility. And if you don't, it is a breach of your obligation. So I would just always keep that in mind.
Okay, one last question before I let you go. I know we got over an hour, and thank you for hanging in there all these questions out. I hear dentists starting to get negative on the informed consents, and they're saying things like I've had dentists tell me this story a long time. Well, they're just going to take that informed consent. They're going to get out a charge on and say that you might possibly get paresthesia on the mandibular canal. Show what is it? Where is the mandibular canal? And they start going through all the Latin terms of anatomy and mental foramens and paresthesias, and they convince the jury that this is written in Latin, and my client only speaks English or Spanish, and she signs something she doesn't understand, and they throw it out. And they're is that really an issue? Or a lot of these informed consents about things that can go wrong during an extraction or a root canal, or are they starting to get thrown out more? Is this not as much protection as it once was in the 70s or 80s?
Oh, I would disagree with that. It's definitely protection. I mean, the circumstance I tend to see is dentists not using them at all, right? So dentists, not everybody, but a lot of them know that they're going to need an informed consent for particularly invasive procedures like an extraction or a root canal. Um, but like I said before, something is better than nothing, right? So for even like a routine procedure, if you're having a patient sign an informed consent form that says that there's risk of infection, and they do ultimately get an infection later and end up in the hospital, which is something I've seen, it's much easier to point to an informed consent form that the patient signed and says, of course, it says right here you've gotten an infection. So something is definitely better than nothing. And different states have different rules, right? This is kind of goes to back, it depends, but different states have different rules. Some states take the patient point of view when it comes to informed consent. Some take the doctor view when it comes to informed consent. So any dentist who's listening to this, check on what state rules you have. And what I always recommend to my clients is get informed consent for just about anything you can do because most states in the country do recommend that every procedure, whether it's therapeutic or whether it's invasive, you do need to obtain informed consent forms. So I would always recommend that my clients get informed consent forms.
Okay, final question. You disclosed that you're from New Jersey, but you did not disclose if you're a Bruce Springsteen or a John Bon Jovi fan. Which one,
Oh,
which of those two is your man?
I grew up with both of them. I don't know if I need to choose. So I'm from East Brunswick, and literally the town next door is Sayreville, where Bon Jovi's from. So I absolutely grew up with both of those bands, and you can't really go anywhere in New Jersey without bumping into a Bruce Springsteen fan. So I've listened to both of them for my entire life, and I'm proud to say I'm from New Jersey, and I'm proud to say I grew up in the town next to where Bon Jovi is from.
Well, have you heard any feedback from his new? There's a new movie on him, Deliver Me from Nowhere. Or the New Jersey people say that's a good film,
The
or
the reviews have not been particularly kind. I like the actor they picked from The Bear, so I'll have to find time to see it. But no one that I've spoken to has colored it in particularly glowing terms. Unfortunately, there's a lot of music biopics out these days, but I'll have to catch it when it hits streaming.
all right, man. Well, on that note, thank you so much for spending an hour in my townies. You gave me so much information. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you, Evan, so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.